the State Urban and Community Forestry Program Manager with the Department of Natural Resources in Lansing. It's a statewide program that works with partners, communities, nonprofit organizations, schools, you name it, homeowners, no matter how big or small they are, working to promote the benefits that trees in public places provide to them, providing assistance in the form of technical assistance, financial assistance, educational assistance to help improve the management and care of those trees.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. Now I'd like to get into talking a little bit about trees and how important they are. Can you tell us some of the key benefits that trees provide us?
Yeah, so certainly trees do add a lot more to our lives than just simple beauty. We know a lot more about trees and the economic, the environmental, the human health benefits that they provide now more than ever, whether we're looking at research that can help us quantify the benefits that they provide in terms of stormwater control and mitigation, or energy cost savings by shading buildings and preventing extra energy that's needed to heat or cool them, to the property value impacts that they can boost the value of properties by adding aesthetic appeal to them. And of course, there's a lot of other benefits that are maybe a little harder to quantify that relate to social and human health, whether it's reducing people's stay in hospital or care facilities because they're exposed to green, and that helps them speed along their recovery process, needing less medication, things like that, or wildlife benefits, recreational benefits. So, simply put, trees do add a lot to our lives, and they're more than just a nicety to have. I've heard it said many times that trees are truly a necessity. They're much more than a nicety.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. And while we're on the subject of benefits of trees, I want to briefly show this to people in case they're not aware, but the National Tree Benefit Calculator is a really helpful tool that people can utilize just to get a rough idea of the benefits of the trees on their own property. So if you just type in your zip code here, I'll type in Charlotte, you submit that. You can enter the species of tree. So obviously you do, if you don't know the species, get some help or look at a tree guide online. Let's see, maybe oak. I'll just do 16-inch diameter just to see in a single family residential. And then it's cool because it will tell you exactly the dollar amount that the tree provides in benefits every year on your property. And it breaks it up for you by stormwater, the increase in property value it brings, energy savings, air quality, electricity, and carbon dioxide sequestration. And you can click on each individual tab and it'll break it down for you. So that's a really cool feature and tool that people can utilize if they are curious. So I definitely encourage you guys to check that out. Moving on now, what would you say, moving on to talking about right tree, right place, I have this nice little diagram here that Consumers Energy has put out on where to plant your trees. And we know that right tree, right place is very, very important. So can you go over some of the criteria, Kevin, that the DNR has for selecting the right tree for the right place?
Yeah, so, I won't say that the DNR has these criteria per se, as much as they're kind of, generally practiced guidelines primarily put out by utility companies that are, very important for people when planting trees to look at, understand, and to follow. Trees and utilities are generally not compatible, right? We don't want to see trees that are getting to a height where they are touching or interfering with overhead utilities or underground utilities as well. That's one of the things that people often forget to think about is, we have utilities both above ground and below ground. And when planting trees or shrubs or digging at all, we really need to pay attention to what's above, what's below, and what's around us. And so to that end, industry, utility industry in particular, has put out guidelines, and that graphic that you've got up does a great job of explaining that and visually showing what we're trying to get at. And so there's more to it than that. It's a little bit simplified because there are some different setbacks for different types of utilities, higher voltage utilities versus lower voltage versus, simply communications type utilities. But generally speaking, you don't want to have large trees that are going to grow to a height that is going to be anywhere near those lines. So I say that they're generally not compatible, but that said, they still can coexist. And if in the right situation, you want and can use a tree under utility lines, then you just need to understand the different growth habits, characteristics of that tree. So if you're going to be able to plant something, then you need to plant a tree that's never going to get to be a mature size that would interfere with those. And usually utility companies, especially in urban settings, are reasonable about that sort of thing. But as I mentioned, as you get to some of the higher voltage utilities, because of some federal regulations that stemmed from major national outages that have derived from tree conflicts, there really is no tolerance for trees that could grow into and interfere with those. But as you step it down a little bit, then it becomes a little bit more practical. But again, I won't overdo it on this topic, but the graphics that are available, this one as an example, are very good. You want to maintain a distance away from them so that when the trees sway in the wind or drop branches or potentially could fall in a storm, that they are clear of those utility lines. And so that's, again, looking at the above ground utilities. The larger the voltage, the further away you must get. When thinking about below ground utilities, the one thing I just say is call MDNR in Michigan because they will come out and mark where utilities are known to be, and you want to try to maintain a distance away from them because you don't want to rupture a line. You don't want to cause an outage because you dug and into a utility that was buried. It's not perfectly accurate all the time, but it's reasonably good, and you should pay attention to those lines and definitely always call before you start digging. So hopefully that helped answer your question.
Yeah, I think it did. And I just also want to note that MDNR is a free service. There's no charge. And I believe if you're in a residential area, it is the law to call before you do any digging, especially near gas lines and all of that. So definitely do that before, I think it's 72 hours, they say, before you plan on planting or something along those lines is generally, but you might want to do it even a little bit before then, just to guarantee. But yes, thank you very much, Kevin. That was I feel like a great answer, and hopefully help people get a better understanding of why it's important that you consider these things. Do you have any other things that you want people to consider before planting other than talking about the utilities?
Certainly whenever you're thinking about planting a tree, several things to keep in mind. One of the things that's really important is diversity. You've heard about diversifying your investment portfolio. Diversifying things has a lot of benefits, and there's reasons for it. And as we talk about tree planting, we don't want to set ourselves up for the next Dutch elm disease or emerald ash borer by planting too many of one type or species of tree. So if you have a lot of maple, which most communities do, we probably don't need to be planting a lot more maples because the next bug that focuses on maples could take out a lot more than what emerald ash borer has done with the ash trees. So look around you, try to plant something maybe that's a little bit different. What's your goal for your planting? What's the purpose of that tree? Is it simply to add some flowering beauty? Is it to enhance shading? So what's your design effect that you're going for? So consider that. Site conditions, really important. And in terms of that, we're talking about, is it the right tree for the climate, the hardiness zone? If you haven't heard about that, that's, how cold or warm the area will be, very general terms, but what will that plant tolerate? Know something about the soil, the characteristics of the soil. Is it well drained? Is it a wet, mucky soil? What's the pH of that soil? Because the trees that you select should match those conditions. What's the light situation look like? How much light access does it have to sunlight? Is it shade tolerant? Is it need full sun? Things of that nature. Is it a wet site? Certain species don't tolerate wet sites. Certain species do. And then, certainly the space that you have, both above ground and below ground. I see too many times people will plant a large, at maturity, a large spruce tree right near their house. And for about 10 years, it's okay. But then as it gets to be fuller and bigger, it's right up against the house. So you have to take that into consideration. What's the mature size, both height and width of that tree when you're selecting it? Maintenance considerations, both short-term and long-term. Are you going to, how are you going to maintain that tree? What's your plan for dealing with leaves that fall? If you get a deciduous tree, if you don't like raking leaves, then maybe you want to get something that's not going to have that problem, an evergreen. Fruits can also be a challenge. If you get something that is dropping nuts or acorns and you don't want that, then you probably picked the wrong tree. So maintenance considerations, something to think about. Are you planting the tree for wildlife, or is wildlife potentially a problem with your planting? Specifically, I'm thinking about deer. Some people plant certain species to kind of recruit wildlife. They like to see songbirds. Others plant trees without thought about deer and then wonder why the tree got rubbed or browsed down and died. So think about that. Definitely insects and disease problems. Know something about whether there's a potential problem with that tree, what it is likely to be, and if it's treatable or not. And if it's treatable, are you willing to treat it? And then lastly, I would just say the concept of native versus non-native is a very important thing to some people. But my biggest issue is not planting something that's invasive. Something that's going to spread and take over an area. Natives are certainly a priority, but non-natives have a place, especially in an environment, in an urban setting, which is anything but natural. So I don't personally get hung up on that. I just focus on whether something is invasive or not. So those are just some quick tips on things I would look for when selecting and planting trees.
Awesome. Yeah, that was a lot. Very comprehensive though. So thank you for that. Those are all really good points. And I definitely have those tips here on our website too. So if people want to come back to the Michigan Arbor Days Alliance's website, they can look at our tree planting tips and go through that bullet point checklist of everything they should be considering before selecting their tree. And with that said, Kevin, are there any particular urban tree species that the DNR might be recommending in the face of climate change, and hardier species to plant in maybe areas that have a lot of salt that they get, on the streets in the winter? Species that might be more tolerant of salt and the changing climate?
Yeah, so one thing I rarely do is promote a tree or a certain set of trees, just because as you find out, if you start pushing the bulletproof tree, then the next thing you know, everyone's out buying it and it's planted all over the place. So what we, again, go back to is diversifying and matching the site and matching your needs. That said, there's a number of trees that do well in urban settings. So the question I would ask is, for small trees, you're probably looking at something that's maybe more ornamental. Serviceberry is a native tree that's on the smaller side to do well in urban settings. Redbud trees, likewise. Crab apples are very common in flowering cherry trees. People looking for a very ornamental, showy tree. Maybe something on the evergreen side would be a holly. Again, a small tree that would possibly do well in a backyard or something like that. You wouldn't plant that on a street, but in an urban landscape, it would do okay. So, those are just a few examples. If you're looking for a small shade tree that might fit under a utility line, maybe something like a hedge maple. which, is not absolutely native. It is maple, but it will generally not be at a height at maturity that would interfere with utilities. For medium-sized trees, we're talking, something 30 to 50, 55 feet at maturity in height. Maybe a red maple on the large side of those medium trees. River birch, which is native as well. Red maple's native. Hornbeams, black gum, and there's even some smaller zelkova, which is a nice vase-shaped medium tree to medium large. If you're looking for something that's more like an evergreen, depending on where you're planting it, probably again not along a street, but an arborvitae, a white cedar, possibly a red cedar. So those are some evergreens that you could consider. And then if you've really got enough space, and I always encourage people that if you have space and you want a large shade tree, don't sacrifice that space to a small tree. You'll lose the benefits that tree could provide. Mm-hmm. So there you're talking about things like, oaks, whether it's, a red oak, a bur oak, a swamp white oak will tolerate wetter sites. Ginkgo trees, not native, but very becoming very common, very large, very showy in the fall. Just make sure you get a male variety because you don't want to mess with the fruits. And by and large, they're not selling female varieties of those for that very reason. Sweet gum, tulip poplar, even American elm. Yep, the American elm, they have a lot of cultivated hybrid varieties that have shown good enough resistance to Dutch elm disease that they are actively selling those in the nursery industry, and those have always done well in urban conditions, very tolerant to a lot of the urban tough sites. If you're looking for something a little different, maybe a bald cypress or a Don redwood, these are deciduous conifer trees. So they look like a typical evergreen through the growing season, but they actually lose their needles completely in the fall and they regrow them in the next spring. That's something that's very interesting. It's not native to Michigan, but they do well on a lot of urban sites. White spruce is a good native conifer. Again, not on a street, but in an urban yard would do well. So, that's just a number of trees that would do well in urban conditions. There's a lot of resources online, and I'm sure you've pointed to some here, Hannah. But I know Cornell University, Michigan State University have some great resources if you're interested in salt tolerance or soils that are wet or specific needs like that. But in general, urban tolerant trees, the ones I've covered here, are a good selection.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Kevin. That was a very good list of trees there for people to look into. And yeah, I know Michigan State has put out a couple of studies on the salt tolerance and climate change and things that, they're looking to start planting in the future. So that was all really good information. Is there anything else that you think might be worth mentioning about Right Tree, Right Place, or maybe any of your programs that you manage at the DNR that you want to touch on?
Well, just the fact that, our program is set up to promote the benefits of trees. There's a lot of campaigns out there right now geared up towards planting trees to improve the community, to improve our livelihoods, to improve and help guard against climate change and things of that nature. Sequestering carbon is a role that trees play. And it's a very important time to be planting trees. It's kind of it's an old saying, but the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the next best time is today. And that is very true. I like to suggest to people to plant it forward, taking off on the phrase of pay it forward, because that's really what you're doing when you're planting a tree today. You're planting the benefits now for the future. And so it's never too early, it's never too late to plant a tree.
And I like that saying too, for sure. All right, so now we're going to be moving on to talking about our Eaton County producer. This ties in with our trees because he's a maple syrup producer, and it's easy to understand why we feature him today because of the connection with the trees. But there's been 3 generations of the Simpson family that have been producing the maple syrup. And they're located just northwest of Charlotte since the 1940s. The four brothers, Max, Al, Roy, and John, along with Roy's son, Grant, have all tapped up to roughly 1,300 hard maples annually. John said this year's tap was looking okay. In normal years, they produce around 200 gallons, sometimes as high as 300 or more. In this year, they've produced roughly 195 gallons. We will drop his contact information in the comments so that if anyone is interested in purchasing any of his maple syrup, you are more than welcome to contact him. John and Roy are like I've mentioned, are longtime supporters of ECD, and were on the board of directors from 1978 to 2001. He was instrumental in the maintenance and delivery of the 3 tree planters that we currently have available for rent, as well as building the trailers for them. Back in those days, there were a lot of trees planted with the planters, and it's evident that when you drive the back roads and see the beautiful fields of conifers. John's contributions are evident in the plaques in his office and among his awards are the Distinguished Service Award, the Outstanding Conservationist, and Conservationist of the Year, which all speak of his exceptional leadership and devoted service to the natural resources of Eaton County. In celebration of ECD's 75th anniversary, we want to salute John Simpson and the Simpson family for their years of service, and to the Simpson family for producing amazing maple syrup. To wrap up, I would like to briefly mention a couple of things regarding Arbor Day, since it is only 2 weeks away. Mark your calendars for April 30th. It's a Friday. That is when Arbor Day is. But it'll be almost 2 weeks later that we hold our tree seedling giveaway at Woldemore Nature Center. We held a tree seedling giveaway last year there, and it was very successful. We gave out over 1,500 tree seedlings, so we decided to bring it back. And we will be there with our sponsor, EDL, handing out tree seedlings. We will have a couple of varieties available, and we will be there from 3 to 7 p.m. And it will be a drive-through setup, and we'll be following all COVID precautions. So we encourage you guys to come out and get your tree seedling. It will be a limit of 1 seedling per person, and it'll be first come, first serve. But we hope to see you there. And with that said, I want to say thank you, Kevin, for joining us today on the talk about Right Tree, Right Place. And I'm going to open it up for questions now.